Good morning, country that used to be America. This is going to be a video about how to restore a free republic. And the very first step of restoring a free republic is to admit that the republic doesn't exist any longer, that the republic failed, that the Constitution, however intelligently it was written and however intelligently it was designed, it wasn't intelligent enough to survive the sociopaths in society who seek political power. And so those sociopaths, 4% of the population approximately, those sociopaths managed to obtain political power even though it was disallowed them by the Constitution. And so the Constitution, as Lysander Spooner said, has been grossly inadequate, whether it was intended to limit government power or not, and whether those intentions were sincere or not. It has failed in that mission. So how do we restore the republic? Well, first we have to understand what the essential components of the republic are. Because if the essential components of the republic are simply that the Constitution say that there are limits on government power, well, that already failed. Those limits already failed. And we're not going to get them back just by saying them or writing them down on another piece of paper. So what limits haven't completely failed? Why is the United States, why is our what remains of our republic, why does anything remain? Why do we not just have the sociopaths executing their enemies in broad daylight with no trial by jury? Why is that? Why do we have any limits on government power at all? Well, that's interesting. It seems that we actually have limits on government power just because the general public expects there to be some sort of limit on government power. But you'll notice that the same general public that expects a limit on government power, they're completely surprised when they get into a courtroom, because anything that they were taught, which is probably very little in the government schools, anything that they were taught about due process, it turns out that they don't have that. They don't have any due process when they go into court. They have a bar licensed attorney who is representing them, and that bar licensed attorney has unwittingly or wittingly, depending on how smart they are, bought into the idea that every law is legitimate simply because the legislature decided upon it. And the legislature is populated almost exclusively by biological sociopaths. Now that's an important point to make. Biology is what determines the structure of society. Not law, not anything else. Biology. Biology operates on survival of the fittest. And survival of the fittest is a lack of civilization. That's essentially the law of the jungle, or might makes right. That's Darwinism, Darwinian survival. So sociopaths are governed by that law. So why don't they try to steal from each other? Why isn't the government always at war with the government? Well, you can say that it was in some way kind of designed to operate like that, although it doesn't operate like that. The judge and prosecutor are happy to enforce all these unconstitutional laws. The instant that you get into a courthouse trying to defend your individual rights, you'll find out that you don't have any very quickly. So why don't the sociopaths steal from each other? Well, they form networks the same way that empaths form networks in markets, and they do so voluntarily. There is a rigid hierarchy of dominance based on power in the political world. And the perceived power of an office, the perceived power, the political power that another sociopath holds, determines his place in the hierarchy. And the only thing that they can all agree on is that that hierarchy should exist, because that political hierarchy places them higher in power and higher in dominance than every single empath Every single person that has mirror neurons, or has what the precursors to the Founding Fathers, the proto-libertarians in England called the levelers, those people called the mirror neuron response, the empathic response, they called it conscience. And so that does have a biological origin. So who are the contestants in this battle for political power? Who are the contestants? The contestants are 96% of society who are empaths versus the 4% of society that are sociopaths. And the sociopaths have recognized the contest that they're in and have ascended to dominance in that conflict. And the empaths are their weak slaves. Now, is that always universally the case, and has that always universally been the case? No, it hasn't. So to what extent were we ever able to limit government power? And to what extent was there ever a constitutional republic? Well, there was only a constitutional republic to the extent that we could limit the police power. Because the police power is the power that is going to insert itself into your life and ruin your life, such as by stealing your property without a trial by jury, or some other new grotesque form of individual rights violation. And as Reason magazine has recently reported, the police now steal more private property than every criminal, than every common private criminal. But then every robbery in the nation is stolen under asset forfeiture laws. So that's billions and billions of dollars that could have been productively inserted into a voluntary marketplace. And voluntary marketplaces are accountable and do a great job of solving problems. Government is unaccountable and does a terrible job of solving problems, generally speaking. So many anarchists then say, well, why have a government at all? And they may have a point, but the general public wants somebody starting tomorrow and actually continuing tomorrow, they want somebody to come when the police are called. And they know that if you suggest a transitional form that is an all or nothing complete radical change, police will not come. Actually, they don't want that to happen. And the police will actually come if there's some sort of private criminal. If there's a John Wayne Gacy, a Jeffrey Dahmer, or a Ted Bundy, the police will come and they will investigate. So that's a vital distinction to be made there. And the question that got, that kind of went back to the anarchy versus minarchy segue there was, how did we ever have any limit placed on government at all if there aren't currently robust limits, hard and fast limits on government power? And the answer to that question is that something called the common law jury was created. And it actually was physically created. It does physically exist in material reality. And it still does exist to some extent. And to the extent that the common law jury exists, we have some measure of individual freedom. But what the sociopaths have figured out is how to defeat the common law jury statistically. And the way that they did that was by stacking the jury. And they do this using an unconstitutional process called voir dire. Voir dire was a aspect of enforcement of the fugitive slave law. So in 1850, the fugitive slave provision in the Constitution was strengthened, and it allowed for a host of powers, to basically allow slave hunters to proceed into Northern Territory to catch and return fugitive slaves. It gave them a bunch more power if law enforcement was willing to violate their oaths to uphold the Constitution, which they were, and they always have been. So the psychopaths have plenty of young men who are stupid, uneducated in the Constitution, full of testosterone, and they're willing to act belligerently in defense of unconstitutional laws and of the unconstitutional sociopath-dominated paradigm.